Stefan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
I am absolutely glad to be here. I've figured sooner or later we'd get around to this, so I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah, I feel, as I already apologized to offer, I'll spare you from that embarrassing blubbering again. But yeah, like I meant to do this a long time ago. And I think, Milo and Bill being on the show. And then there was that time we were going to do it with Black Flag when you're playing with, or sorry, Flag. Didn't mean to cross
Uh-huh.
those streams. But I'm glad it's come up now where I feel like I've gotten a lot more context for not only Descendants and all, but specifically the stuff that I really want to focus on, which is that journey to this stuff, which you have. There's a lot of cool shit that happened.
Absolutely. Yes, it's been a ride for sure. It's been interesting.
Well, let's start at the beginning then. Stefan, how'd you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it?
Absolutely. So okay, so I'll go back a little further than that. That I started playing guitar right about I was thinking about this last night. It's been 50 years next month that I got my guitar. So that's a long time. So I started playing when I was 9, and somewhere around 11 or 12, there was a Time magazine article that came out in the US that talked about punk rock. That was my first exposure to it. I was just like, oh wow, look at these guys, man. These guys are wild. And I was very, very hyper active ADD music fiend. I spent every waking moment listening to, trying to learn chords, whatever. I was, into music that much. And I was like, wow, this stuff looks pretty wild. But there was really no availability to it. I grew up in Salt Lake City, and so it took a little while for records to, the punk records to make their way there. So I think I was maybe 14 when I just bought the Sex Pistols record because that was the name I knew. And I found Nevermind the Bollocks. I bought it. At the time I was listening to nothing but prog rock. I was into like fusion and prog rock. That was it. I was like, yes. And Mahavishnu Orchestra, Jeff Beck, jazz. Like I was listening to all of this, way over here. And then I heard that and it was like, exploding 14-year-old. And I know that a lot of people are, people kind of Sex Pistols, man, or whatever. Like people, and I mean, it's weird how many people do because this record, I mean, it hit me like a ton of bricks.
It's one of the
It's
greatest
just
records
like,
ever.
yeah, it's fucking unbelievable. Before Lydon even speaks his first, sings his first word in there, you're just like, what the fuck just happened? With those guitars and that, it's just insane. So anyway, that's my introduction to punk. It was sort of a combination of having just seen it and been made aware of it. Somebody bought a copy of that record. Somebody in, like, maybe it was my junior high or early high school, and really hated it, which that seems suggestive. It might be interesting, which maybe that's why I bought it. Well, I don't know. That dude said it sucked. I said, fuck it, I'm going to check it out. Anyway, so that's how I ended up there. You know.
So prior to that, you mentioned being into like sort of prog rock and jazz, and I've read that it's on your Wikipedia, that you love Zappa too. And I kind of look at Zappa now as being something that is proto-punk for a lot of people. Like Dick from the Subhumans was just on and said that's what his gateway to punk was, and he considers that punk.
100%. Absolutely 100%. I think there was a neighbor around the corner who, as I was, getting into music, and I mean, my main thing was the Beatles, and then like whatever stuff my mom had in her collection because I'm just a little kid, so I don't have much myself. And he gave me a copy of Absolutely Free, the second Mother's record, and I think it opened the door that allowed punk in. Like I would have, and prog rock. To be fair, probably it allowed everything in that wasn't just kind of like songwriting, because it was sort of like musical. What probably got fulfilled from people by, like, let's say Monty Python or Benny Hill or
Hmm.
something like that, like a fair bit of absurdity in there. I think that's what Zappa brought, and let that in there. And of course, little kids like 11, 12, 13, as your brain is kind of developing, if you're like a goofy, weird fucker, then you're gonna glom onto that shit, which is exactly what happened. I was absolutely nuts about that record. And then what did I bought like, just from there I collected a few others. And in fact, the first date that I ever went on, I took a Mormon girl. I'm from Salt Lake. I took a Mormon girl, my junior high girlfriend, to see Zappa. And oh boy, that didn't go well. Us just say our relationship was quickly over. I did do that. So, anyway, Zappa, absolute gateway for me. Yeah, to all kinds of shit, really, because his the stealth complexity of it. You know what I mean? There's just so much shit going on. And yes, we've got Susie Cream Cheese coming at you like, ridiculous shit. But then, the music is just off the chain, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? So I think it absolutely informed like my interest in punk 100%.
I think it's also like the subverting that it's doing of the form and the way he talked in interviews, the way he acted, and just sort of like kind of proto Lydon in the difficultness of him, and maybe in his political trajectory too. Weirdly, when you think about it.
Absolutely. If you see some of those interviews where he comes on and he absolutely just hangs fucking toe to toe with like, political commentary dudes of his time or whatever. And he's just, like, no, this, this is how it is. And you kind of go, yeah, fuck, this is Biafra for a generation before Biafra. That's who this is. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah, when
And
Biafra's
yeah,
on.
oh no, you're absolutely right about like the sort of the uh the commentary, just how totally out of place that was. And I mean, yeah, there was plenty of protest music, but it was not quite like that. Yeah, the delivery was somewhat different.
Zappa came up when Biafra was on one of the times, and he was like, I went over to his house one time during the PMRC thing, and we watched televangelist exercise aerobic videos where they're zooming in on their breasts as they're jumping up and down, but it's a Christian thing, and we were laughing hysterically. So they were kindred spirits, I believe.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, there's no question like that's probably my single gateway towards like punk or, having the brain that was going to be able to take that on or whatever. Like, yeah,
So
love him.
I think out of any place in America that I have, well, because I've never been there, sort of like the least actual understanding of, and probably most of my understanding comes from like stereotypes is Salt Lake City, Utah in general. I know the stench, and I know Massacre Guys, as we're going to talk about in a second. Like I know that there is, and I certainly know later on, and to this day, there's like a history of punk and hardcore there. But what was the Zappa show like in Utah? Like there's
Zappa
enough.
show. Yeah, it was the fucking Salt Palace, which is where you go to see the Who. I mean, it was, and I mean, I wasn't really paying attention to whether the place was full. It seemed full to me. I mean, it seemed like full on, and at the time, it was the Chic Your Booty record, which had the nearest thing to hits the things Zappa was really able to have. And it was contextually very very strange, but so Salt Lake, to understand how somebody like Zappa might have a great gain a foothold in a town like that is to understand that where there are like extreme religious boundaries, the people that freak are going to freak harder, longer, deeper, bigger. I mean, it's full of fucking weirdos, and it produces weirdos. It just does. So we had a thriving punk rock scene, and there were very well the bands that sort of bridge the gap between the Dolls and punk rock, like where that kind of exists. Stooges influenced bands, that kind of stuff. We fully had that in Salt Lake. Now I was too young to see some of those bands, but a lot of the guys that were a little older that started the first wave Salt Lake bands that just played in the tiny clubs or opened for who play parties, that kind of stuff. These guys were all they all came up through that. They were all in cover bands. They all ended up finding the Stooges and shit like that and going, whoa, fuck. And then the Ramones just blew that apart. And so we had a thriving punk scene going all the way back, which is weird, but it's because weirdos they're fucking all over the place. It's all like, we're everywhere, you know, and it was awesome. It was actually, we had a great scene. I mean, we had the first show that you and I would recognize as there was we had a local club for a little while called the Roxy that had the great local bands. And we had a handful of really cool local bands in, like, let's say 79, 80, somewhere in there. Really cool, like ones that, unfortunately the recording, nobody was really, very few recordings exist of any of those bands. There is, a couple. There's a 7-inch by a band called Angle that, like 5 people have heard and is worth like $1,000 or whatever. But and Angle were cool. They were buddies of ours. But so these bands were playing at this little club, and there was some 21 and over bars there that I believe, like, I know the Stranglers played there. I know the Ramones came through at some point. I want to say the Police came through. I mean, there were a couple of, really bitchin' shows that I never got to go to, of course. But the first show that you and I would recognize, which was a rented hall, with a rented hall, all ages style show, which had never been done there, was Black Flag. And we had 500 fucking people, and this was Dezo's last show singing. And it was spring of 1981, and we fucking had a huge crowd. So, Salt Lake has an interesting, thing that way. We had fucking killer shows. So,
Well,
killer
that's
scene for.
like I knew about Angle because obviously it's on a want list I have, and but in terms of like the other stuff, the history of it is so underdocumented. I've found, and maybe it's just I'm looking in the wrong places for it, but it just feels short of you guys because you guys got on two really important labels I find in the mid 80s, certainly well distributed labels in Canada that I've been able to find records by over the years. And also Massacre Guys are fucking sick. So like but short of that and that Stench 7 inch, as I say, like I don't really think a lot of shit, even the record wise or demo wise, really got out that I know of.
There's one good one, the one that gets out, and this is interesting. You'll be able to probably track this down, but it's so very well the first Red Cross EP. Well, there was a compilation record called The Siren, and the Siren had the whole Posh Boy era Red Cross EP, plus a band called 391, which I believe is a San Francisco band, and then 3 songs by a band called Spit and Teeth. Spit and Teeth was our breakout. They actually, maybe they were even on like some kind of a local public access TV show at one time, and so there is a recorded document of Spit and Teeth. And Spit and Teeth, they were slower and more kind of dirgy and grindy, but they were cool. They were really good. And so that's another one to look for. But as far as like, say, video footage and that kind of stuff, not very little. There were a couple of zines that tried to pop up, and not very little in that way. Um, and then as far as musicians that from that scene that got out and sort of got anywhere, there was really not much of that. There was, Carl and I for a long time, and Terrence from the Stench. He was, they sort of hooked into that. They were a few years younger than Carl and I, and they got out and kind of started getting known a little bit outside, and did touring and that kind of thing. And a few other bands. LDS did. There were a handful of
Oh,
small bands
LDS, of
from
course. Fuck. I totally,
LDS. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
sorry.
Yeah, they had a recording. Yeah, there were a handful of bands that started to sort of trek out a little bit further, and but it's funny because, I mean, you've talked to so many people. Certainly, you've like me, you've realized there was like there were a couple, there was, somebody in each city, right? There's Massacre Guys in Salt Lake, and there's 7 Seconds over in Reno, and there's, Detroit's up. You know what I mean? There's like, like I live in Oklahoma now. NOTA was the band from where I live in Tulsa. They were the kind of not, they were going to be opening for whoever was coming through and that kind of thing.
And they were your future
Yeah.
label mates.
And they were our future label mates, which was just a completely random happenstance. And there's a lot of friends like that. Like you would know Reverend Norb.
Yeah.
His band was Suburban Mutilation. We were on a Toxic Shock Records compilation together, fucking way back when.
How did I not know
So
he was in Suburban Mutilation? That's fucking
yeah, he's in
crazy.
Suburban. Isn't that weird? Like, yeah, exactly. He was in Suburban Mutilation. Yeah, so there's, yeah, so those bands were all kind of networking too. The Frantics and White Trash, those were the great Denver
My
bands right
dad's a
over the hill,
fucking
right over the mountain.
alcoholic.
Alcoholic. Yeah, totally. Those are the guys Massacre Guys would stay with, and vice versa, when we go play each other's cities and shit, and that's how that there's that era of the US scene, at least probably the Canadian one. We just couldn't get that far yet, but yeah. So anyway, that's a little bit of an encapsulation of the Salt Lake thing, and then I moved away in 1985. So when, by the time stuff was really starting to roll there, because then somebody put together a really interesting club, because I've mentioned earlier that, the bars were 21 and over, but in Salt Lake, the bars had been 21 and over back when half of the country was still 18 and over. So we were all, we were going to be, that kind of state.
Yeah.
And so this club opened called the Speedway Cafe. And the Speedway was actually opened by buddies of mine after I left, not long after I left. And they did an interesting thing there where they worked out somehow with the city. I don't know how they did this. They had this was just kind of a big empty room in a not great part of town. They had one section of it where they had almost like a coat check for beer. If you were 21, you could bring beer, you could sit it in a cooler, you could come in there for a while, have a beer, and then go back out and like stage out or whatever you were going to do, So at the Speedway, that's where the more like hardcore, like the hardcore as we knew it a little bit later. Some of the, straight edge bands, that kind of stuff that was starting to pop up. That's where all that stuff really flourished. And I was gone by then. I missed out on, on all of that stuff. I didn't come back for a good few years.
I guess LDS would have been the bridge band between your era and then the Stench era, I guess a little bit later, right? Because they would have been 85 that
Yeah,
LP, right?
I believe that's right. And they, Stench though, well,
87, I think, was
Terrence
seven.
had been around. Yeah, that sounds probably right. And I was kind of out of touch with everybody by then. I mean, we started coming through. Well, there was like 2 years where I was gone, but it seemed like a lifetime right then because these were all my friends. Um, uh, yeah, I moved in '85, and then I came back through. Like basically 2 years later with Descendents. So it was very strange.
Obviously, like Black Flag's like a huge band, not a huge band, but like a band that would draw, I imagine, a lot more kids than the local shows would necessarily draw, like as was the case everywhere. Uh, so like, what was the scene like otherwise, other than like a Black Flag show when you guys started? How did you kind of meet Carl and form Massacre Guys?
Well, so with Carl, we met in junior high. We met when we were 11. So like, we were just little kids when we met. We met actually at an audition for a talent show. And I was 11. He's 12. He's a little older than me. So I was playing Stairway to Heaven or something on the guitar. And Carl was lip syncing with the piano to a song called "Poisoning Pigeons in the Park" by Tom Lehrer. That's where we first kind of became aware of each other. And I was like, this guy. And so I just around the time that I had was really into Zappa, I was looking. I was trying to write songs, and you're always forming bands when you're a kid, even if you don't know what the fuck you're doing. You're always like you have this band idea in your head. So I was looking for somebody who could write weird lyrics, a la Frank Zappa, and a mutual friend, kind of introduced us, and we were already aware of each other from this talent show thing. So we hit it off, and then we've been friends ever since. So when I needed a bass player. I was like, here, take this thing, and just showed him the basics. And then he figured it out because he's a smarty pants, and so here we are all these years later. The rest of the scene, there were other kindred spirits, a couple guys in high school. That's who we started the Massacre Guys with, was one of the guys from high school that was already starting to collect records. He was buying them from like gold mine, or whatever. Like he was he was finding out about these bands like via those channels, because of course we had no, this is before we have any fanzines or anything we can really look at. And so he's finding gold mine. He's heard of these bands somehow. There's another interesting character that's a big part of the Salt Lake punk scene development, I'd have to say. This guy's name is Brad Collins. Brad's father was named Al Jasbo Collins. And if you look him up, not that anyone's going to put any time into this, but like,
are you kidding? I'm going to look this guy up as soon as we're done this.
Al Jasbo Collins was like, if not the first, among the very first people to have a jazz radio show in San Francisco a fucking long time ago, right? So this guy's badass. And so Brad is his son, and Brad, I don't know, he had a few years on us. He was, 5 years older than us or something. And Brad is the guy that owns Raunch Records, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yeah.
Brad owns Raunch. Okay, so now Brad and his then girlfriend, Susan, they each had punk radio shows on a local community, on a community radio station. That's immense for us, because this was a place where we could hear all kinds of shit. That's the first place I heard the Germs. Susan leaned more into the new wave stuff, so that's probably the first place I heard Devo or Gary Newman or anything like that, because that was pre them ever blowing up on the radio. And so, and then we have this hippie record store called Cosmic Airplane that is a head shop, hippie, badass bookshop. You can buy your incense, you can buy your whatever, you can buy all of that stuff. And they had a great record store, and they had a punk section. They eventually, there was enough people coming in and asking. They said, fine, okay, fine, we'll buy some punk rocks. So we have this weird punk rock section, and we can, that was all of that stuff is crucial to the development of it, because that's where we could finally hear that stuff. And that was pretty early. I mean, I was still in high school when Brad and Susan had their shows, and I'd stay up late, I was supposed to be in bed, and I'm like, and I'm like, so that's where a lot of the we heard a lot of the guys like Carl and I, and our other friends and Massacre Guys. And so that's Massacre Guys sort of just developed out of, friends, smoke weed, go, write stupid shit in our buddy's sewing room. That's really what that was. And it, and then we started sending demo tapes of our just insane early stuff, which is just done on piano and drums. It's fucking ridiculous.
I gotta hear this. What?
Yeah, I don't know that there's any copies of it. But who we used to send it to was funny. We were all obsessed with X. So we would send our shit to X. And they, of course, looking back on it now, they must have been like, this is the weirdest fucking thing I've ever heard. This is piano and drum based punk rock from the Mormon Stronghold. This is the strangest thing I've ever heard. And they loved us. They were totally nice to us. They would send us letters. They sent us like stickers and patches and shit. They were totally cool to us. So, while you and I were at punk rock bowling, I was like, oh, I felt John Doe's playing fucking, like he's still like, godlike to us or whatever. So anyway, this is kind of a funny, the way the Massacre Guys developed. There was like little bits of input like that were huge for dudes like us.
Have you talked to him about this? Have you brought it up to him?
Oh yeah, totally. No, he remembers the Massacre Guys. Funny, he remembers the Massacre Guys way more than he remembers Descendents. Like he absolutely knows who Massacre Guys are. Just because. Well, and when they came through on the uh under the Big Black Sun, they came through right when they put out that, and we're one of the first stops probably coming from Los Angeles. They requested us to open for him. So Massacre Guys got to open for X. I mean, we were just like, it was fucking awesome. Anyway,
That's
so
awesome.
John totally does remember, and he, he came here to Tulsa. We have a couple of really interesting we have a Woody Guthrie Museum. There's a local philanthropist here who's really done a fantastic job of kind of bringing some interesting things into the city, and so we have this Woody Guthrie Museum and the Bob Dylan Archive, and these are of course very John Doe sorts of places, and they've brought John Doe in. He did a book signing here. My daughter went down. Hey, my dad was in the Massacre Guys. Oh, totally remembered. Could not fucking believe it. It was so awesome.
We got to do an episode, the three of us. I would love to have the
Oh,
three.
I would love that. I would love that. I'd love to find out what his memories were because I mean, knowing what we sent these poor people and that they listened to, and I think, how like, okay, so at some point when All was touring or Descendants, I don't remember who, Wesley Willis gave us a cassette, came up and sold us a cassette, to our who was selling our merch at the time. And somebody else went, "Oh, that's a local legend. This guy, he's really something." So like our merchandiser bought a cassette. And of course, we're just like, what? We listened to it 24/7. I know that's what was happening with X. They were just like, these guys are the most absurd, insane fucking thing I've ever heard. It was this. So anyway, I wish that those tapes existed because Massacre Guys developed into a real band, but its beginnings were absolutely stupid. I mean, just hilarious, stoned, dumb, errant high school kids, whatever. Fucking hilarious. Pretty funny.
So your parents weren't Mormon? Like you didn't grow up in a Mormon household, it doesn't sound like.
No, my dad was the black sheep of a big Mormon family, and so we ended up out there when we were broke. But yeah, so I didn't grow up in that world at all, which is I mean very briefly when we were living with but I was pre-memory pretty much. But of course, you're immersed in it at all times. It's everywhere. And I mean, to be fair, it isn't like life wrecking. I mean, the Mormons are easy. They're nice. They bring you pie. I mean, Mormons are cool.
But, but like, was there like a Mormon punk scene in the way that there's like a Christian punk scene? Like from the very beginning, there's Christian punk bands like the Altar Boys and stuff like that, right? Like there a Mormon attempt to kind of like do a Christian thing, or Mormon kids trying to like.
I think interesting. That's a great question because I think what happened there was that in scenes that had a deep conservatism, like the where I live now is really very similar. Tulsa is very similar to Salt Lake. And of course, all of that like straight edgy hardcore stuff really sunk in hard here. And we didn't have we in fact, because it was young people in rebellion mode against any of that stuff. We had, one of our great local bands in Salt Lake was the Atheists. They were one of the best. But some of those people had definitely come from Mormon households and had blown out of that big time. And I'm sure that a lot of them probably went back. I know at least one other guy from one other local guy who was a returned missionary from the church who blew out of all that and may have landed back there for all I know. I'm not sure, um, but I think that just as we had this really strong kind of hardcore, straight edgy thing here with some Christian undertones, you might call it, here in Tulsa before I got here. Salt Lake definitely had that right around the time that I left. But when I was there, definitely not. It was all like counterculture. It was where all the gay folks were. It was where, trans folks were, all the weirdos showed up at punk rock. That's, which was fine. That was exactly how it should be. I think, we needed that.
Well, I think that's what is amazing about this scene is and obviously it gets conservative and violent at times, and so I don't mean to talk about it like it's perfect always, but when it is perfect, it's a place that anyone can kind of go and you can make piano, drum, bass, punk rock, and someone will be listening to it. Your heroes will think it's kind of cool, and
Absolutely.
have you open them for them, and it's yeah, and obviously you guys worked so hard and took it to the furthest place it could be taken, but it seems like it is a way to kind of have entry to a music scene in a place which isn't like there's no geographical privilege in Salt Lake City like you have in like a Toronto or a New York or an LA or London or one of these places.
Totally. This was really, and when I was mentioning all that kind of thread of bands of that certain size, the ones that were going to open for the early, road pioneers like the Dead Kennedys and Black Flag and the bands that were, putting together the initial structure of the, American touring punk rock scene, the all of us like local bands, that's really what it was. All of us were, how do you end up with, Biscuit and yeah, guys like that in a place like Austin? That's where they're going to land, of course. Where else could they land?
And this is just maybe me othering you, your home city again, but like Austin is weird as a place. And I know Salt Lake City has this kind of subculture, but I also have learned a lot about Brigham Young University from TikTok recently and what the kids there seem like. And I know there's conservative kids and kids, but like it's like a religious thing. Then I know there's Christian stuff everywhere, and there's really really strict Christian kids too. But like it does feel a little more in I don't know indoctrinated, pervasive, and certainly like you brought up cannabis. Knowing about cannabis laws, they're fucking strict as hell in Utah, and like they're probably strict in places, but I don't like Tulsa. Has it decriminalized in Tulsa
Well,
itself?
we're medical here, which was an accident. I mean, I don't know how that slipped under the cracks. I mean, we have a dispensary every like 8 feet here, which is weird because I mean, this is not that kind of place at all, or it wasn't, or there was like, that kind of strong countercultural thing where all of the countercultures are dumped into one melting pot. They're all smoking weed. I guess that's kind of how it played out, and power to it, fine by me.
It doesn't feel like as like I don't know, and this is like I need to go there. I need to go there to think and understand a
Well,
little bit better.
I don't get to see a lot of it. Like we've played, like let's say Provo, where we would play Provo, and we would get a decent show there when
Mhm.
Massacre Guys go down. We'd have a bunch of kids show up, and it was usually pretty good. And but the more Christian side of it wasn't a those scenes had developed. Let's say if a band like MXPX who was at least kind of part of that world, I was unaware of it. It wasn't coming through Salt Lake. We didn't really have it that I saw,
Yeah,
not at least not before I left in '85.
yeah,
And then later on, though, I wouldn't be surprised when the Speedway was open and when that stuff happened. I wouldn't be surprised if if there was some of that there, and I just kind of unaware of it.
yeah. Because certainly by the '90s, there's that being clear, and there's like all the hubbub about like straight edge in Salt Lake City and the violence with the straight edge, which I think the media kind of blew that a little bit more out of proportion than it really was. From I know you'd moved away by that point, but yeah,
It
I don't.
certainly wasn't a talking point when I'd come through town. Oh, everything's fucked up. No, nobody was really talking about it in that way. I mean, it existed there, but I think it was, oh, well, yeah, this was a logical, likelihood in a place like this that this was going to happen.
Yeah, because it got syndicated that article all over the world, I guess, because my dad read it and it played right into this narrative he had about me being straight edge and it being like fascism, because that was my way of rebelling against my dad was by being straight edge. I think is
By being straight edge. Yeah.
he was very countercultural and booked Beefheart shows and all this kind of shit. So for him, it was like I don't understand this at all, which
But that makes
we
sense.
all got.
Yes, if my cut started to look a little military, my mom was stoked about that. Which I relate to now. I get it. I get why she'd have been like, nah, because she'd grown up in that world. So she was not, she was like, I'm not into this, So I mean, that's funny that it works out like that for guys like us.
And I guess it's the community you're in and being in a city like Salt Lake where it is an actual city and there's different types, a lot more people. Because, like Shannon Shaw, do you know from Shannon and the Clams?
Mm-mm.
Oh, great, incredible singer, like one and super, super cool. She was just on the podcast and she grew up in a Mormon community out in California.
Oh,
And
oh.
her parents got divorced and they were excommunicated from the church. And so they would still go as kids and have to like listen to sermons about how they needed to help get their parents back together. And once again, this is a smaller community, I guess, and like, but it does seem like it is like I don't know. I grew up Anglican, so I don't think I really had as much of a. It wasn't as conservative a religion to kind of be around. And when my parents stopped going to church, it was like no big deal. And I don't think my, like it was just not a thing for us. So maybe that's my other lack in knowledge of it. But like, was it like you didn't have to deal with any of that shit? I guess because you're in a huge city and your parents have their own community outside of like.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was the place that you dealt with it is as a young person that you have, you're surrounded by kids who are completely embedded in it and just are like, wait, what? Like they just don't get it that you're not part of that. That's the stranger thing. And there, I mean, at that time, when I was really young, I want to say that 50% of the people in Salt Lake were Mormon. That's a lot. You know what I mean? That's a fucking lot of people, and so that means that half the kids you run into in elementary school are going, what the fuck is wrong with you? You don't go to the what? You're going to hell? That kind of shit. You know what I mean? And because that's where you're all at mentally. It's all black and white still. The nuance hasn't grown and flowered. So um, so some of your friends are Mormons and their parents are like this kid, they're that kind of that's the stuff that's where you really see it in a place like Salt Lake, or at least in my experience that way it was.
And I promise I won't dwell on this anymore, but I just because it is so interesting for me. Like, but being in a band called Massacre Guys, like watching these TikToks of kids at this university, and the kids are like, one of the questions this guy always asks the kids is like, "Have you ever watched a rated R movie?" Unless all these kids are lying, but they all seem very earnest. Most of them are like, "No, I've never watched a rated R movie." And so like being in a band called Massacre Guys, given what you're dealing with on a daily basis, just being, blue haired or something, or just being strange, like that must have been nuts. Like that would be like walking around with a shirt in Toronto that said "fuck Drake" or something.
Absolutely, absolutely. That it was. I mean, it was just a procession of Devo. I mean, that's just everywhere you go. It's Devo, and then, or people jumping out of a car and fucking beating the shit out of you and jumping back in and leaving. I mean, that was just what it was like. And you look back and you go, why the fuck did I, expose myself to that mud? But it just at the time you're compelled. I mean, that was how it was for me. It was just this was a dividing line where, it may fuck me. I don't know. Maybe that kind of ultra conservatism is a pressure cooker for people that maybe wouldn't go completely off the rails. And in a funny way, I wonder about that because our punk scene was laden with, you know, uh, I mean, drugs. I mean, it was wild. It was a as full on a scene as anywhere else, and all of the same things were available to us in Salt Lake as they were in every other city. That was absolutely true. And as far as getting, I would say that it almost made people go further than they would have gone. And if things in Europe where there's like remote acceptance of drinking, oh yeah, drinking, you get to a certain point you drink, it's not as opposed to like drinking you'll go to hell, then like you the head trip thing is really different, and trying to navigate being a weirdo and like figuring yourself out in the midst of all that, it makes you act differently. I think it'd be real interesting to know what it was like to be in a city like Toronto or San Francisco or somewhere really multicultural, really broad and interesting when you're at that stage of development. If you go off the deep end like that, maybe it's because you really are off the deep end, where like a lot of dudes like me are just very pretty, average dudes. We're just normal guys. I like my music fast. That's all, it's not that big a deal.
Well, that's why I've always felt that yourself and Carl are such a contrast to Bill and Milo's experience, where California punk is popular like the whole way through, and like the jocks like punk in some cases. And I've had kids on the show that were slightly different in their identification of punk, that dealt with having to be fucked with by kids that like wore, no disrespect I mean on this, but like Epitaph Band or Fat Record Band's t-shirts, which definitely wasn't mainstream where I'm from. As cool as Toronto is as a place, that stuff was still weird up here and wasn't, but like in California that stuff's like popular, and that's why I respect you and Carl, not just as musicians, but your journey so much, because like to do what you did, and there's a lot of geographical privilege that people have, and to be able to do this and to build it and to like reach out and to kind of like do this shit, that takes so much more effort than having it just kind of come to you.
It was sort of like that. And there was a little bit of it that would come to us in the form of skiing, which is weird because the California, we have enough proximity we're easy enough to get to for rich people in California that were immersed in punk in when it was cool there, yet not cool in Salt Lake. But there were people that were coming in and there were, so it was kind of like there was a slight Southern California influence. And hence when the bands that really hit hard after the initial first wave of all punk, UK, New York, whatever, then next, comes in Black Flag and all of the Southern California stuff, including the Orange County stuff. And we don't know where it's all from, but what we definitely didn't know is that it was kind of somewhat cool there. And so when I was 16 and whacked out, I hitchhiked. Yeah, I wasn't living at home. I hitchhiked to Los Angeles with the hope of seeing Black Flag. I was 16. I just wanted to see Black Flag. This was before they came through Salt Lake. So I get down there. First show I saw was 45 Grave at the Whiskey with when Pat and Don were both playing in the band. Like, and I'm just a pig in shit, but I didn't realize the scope of the city, how big it was, how cool it was, how it was just, there were clubs everywhere. It was like Mecca, for dudes like me. So I got to see all of these insane shows. I was, I just lived on the street or whatever couch I could find for maybe a month and a half down there when I was 16. And Black Flag was on their first U.S. tour, so I totally missed them. I did help Spot push his Volkswagen out of. This is great. I helped Spot push a Volkswagen. He had a Black Flags. He had the bars painted on his sweatshirt he was wearing. He had a Volkswagen that had broken down right in front of fucking Okie Dogs. I don't know how the hell this
Holy
happened. And so
shit.
I see this guy out there, this little guy out there pushing. I'm like, oh, fuck, so I go out there and help this guy. And we had a few minutes conversation about all that. And I'm like, I have all of these records with your name on it. And he's the one that let me know they were on their first tour. It was just, a hilarious time. I saw so much cool shit. We could have a whole episode on that period because it was just crazy. Starwood was open, Whiskey was open, the Vex was open. I think Mask was gone. Hong Kong had closed, but or at least a punk rock. But there was availability there that was unprecedented to somebody from where I was from. So, I just had a backpack and fuck, it was wild times. I saw some awesome shit there.
Where
It
was
was great.
all this shit in the Descendents documentary? Holy shit. Like,
Well,
oh my.
it's funny. We never, we were so focused on, this other, and funny that, so Descendants, here's where the connection happens. So before the Fat EP came out, they released those songs, I believe, in rough mix form on a cassette that you've probably heard of called The Future Looks Bright Ahead, which was a compilation made up of half SST and half Posh Boy
Yeah.
stuff. And
Rare as
that's
fuck.
where rare as fuck, super rare. And Brad Collins, Al Jaspo Collins' son, my buddy, uh, he had this cassette, and that was the first place that I heard the Descendants was there. And I was like, fuck yes, this is Wiener Schnitzel, and I like food, it just feeds, Carl and I are just over the moon. So Fatty P comes out, of course, that it makes its way to Salt Lake. I buy that immediately. And then Milo Goes to College comes out. As soon as it comes out, we buy it. We don't know it's coming. We just, oh, fuck yeah, they can put out a record. We're just, so we buy it. And we went ape shit for that stuff because we were already trying. What was cool about Descendants for us, for Carl and I, was that in our limited little way, without any real, not, musical acumen or knowledge or training or anything like that. I took some lessons, but I mean, yeah, okay, I learned a couple scales or whatever. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, and I still don't. But what we did notice was that a lot of the records we liked the most, the guitar and the bass weren't doing exactly the same thing. They weren't doing the Ramones thing, like where, everybody's kind of in, their box or whatever together. It wasn't like that. There was going on. Minutemen, or Black Flag, really. But Descendants was a really extreme version of that, where the guitars were really the kind of rhythmic anchor of the band, and the melody was being taken was the bass, and we loved that record. And I think, without being able to pinpoint the fact that it was like, oh, this speaks to the Beatle guy, because really, ultimately, it all travels back to the Beatles. The Beatles are like, they're like the English language to me. That is where music starts and ends, is the Beatles. So I'm like, I get this, but I didn't put two and two together about the melodic side of it and how important that was to me. But they were right there in the middle of my favorite bands, Black Flag and the Beatles. They were right kind of there in the middle, and they were doing this thing. And so Carl and I were already massive fans. When we got to join, it was just like, oh, this is awesome. So in the doc, we're talking about that side of it. That's really, that was what we were more focused on.
I know, but like it's still like I don't know, it's just such an amazing journey that gets you there. And this part of it too, especially like did you see them out there?
Yeah, the first place I finally got to see them was in DC. Carl did see them. Maybe, but I guess it would have been on the same tour, because they probably came through Salt Lake. They probably wound their way into DC. This was Doug and Ray, because Tony and Frank never toured in that way. They went up to San Francisco, but that thing was pretty. Although it was together a long time, and of course, as you know, a band could easily sustain a not a functional career isn't the right way to say it, but like the nexus of doing what a band does could exist in Southern California, and with an occasional trip to Northern California and Phoenix, that's enough to sustain a band. You could, oh yeah, we got two shows next month. You know what I mean? Back then. So that's really what the Descendants were. They never did a proper tour until they had Doug and Ray in the band. And so, I saw them twice. I believe I saw them twice in DC during a year and a half that I was there, year and 3 months, 4 months, something like that. So funny.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like, man, there's so much to get to. But like, yeah, I guess it's like almost like the evangelical kind of work of bands like Black Flag and the Circle Jerks. Unless I guess Circle Jerks a little bit later, but DOA. I guess
TSOL for us.
they would come through too, right? Like I guess.
TSOL came through. Five-man TSOL with Frank Agnew came through. They were like the second band after Black Flag came through. Then TSOL, or maybe just, I think they were the next band to come through and play that same Salt Lake Indian Center where all those early shows were, the all ages type. And they loved us, and they took Massacre Guys. They were just like, these kids are awesome. We love these guys. And they were barely older than us, but they took us to all the first shows that we got to do outside of Salt Lake. They took us to Denver. They took us, we went to California with them. Uh, we played one of the first Golden Voice shows in Santa Barbara when Gary was up there promoting shows in the beginning with TSOL, Bad Religion, and there had been a little interband fight in TSOL that day, and Roach was either kicked out or quit. I don't remember which it was, but these guys were our best friends. Jay Bentley sat in on
Oh
bass. I mean,
wow.
and JFA played with Bam Bam. I mean, and we opened or whatever. We TSOL took us on all. They taught us how to tour and the relevance of it, and how a person even does that, because it was just foreign. We wanted to. This is all Carl and I wanted, was to do that. Um, but we didn't know how to do it, and we were dumb kids with no money and no jobs, and where do you even make that happen? But it was watching those bands, just like you're saying. Sorry, I kind of divide.
No, please. I want to. This is
I
like
took us over here. Sorry.
you're one of the people that I want to read a book by. You're like I just like prior to this, I had one set of paths that I was thinking of following for this conversation, but holy shit, man, this is crazy. Going back to the Golden Voice. Oh my God. Well, going back to that Golden Voice thing, in once again cannabis research, I've come to find out that it was a lot to do with cannabis and the cannabis industry in the beginning of its company. And according to legend, Golden Voice was a certain strain that would help you sing better. That early people behind the Golden Voice production company helped
I've never heard
distribute.
this. I knew that there were some complications with weed with Gary at some point, but I didn't know the story of that strain. Um,
According to legend,
I think for
I've asked some people and they're like, I don't know. So I'm going with the
I've
legend
never
on
heard
this
that,
one.
but we'll have to ask, I mean, maybe we'll have to ask Gary about this, I run, yeah, let's go, dude, or whatever. We back and forth. I might have to hit him up about that. I'll see if I can get back to you on that. That's a fascinating idea.
Well, I love the corporate music side, secret punk rock history, like Silva, like manager of Nirvana and everything like that, was Jello Biafra's roommate.
Oh, crazy. I had no idea.
It's always like, yeah, these things are bubbling under the surface. Anyway, now I'm derailing the conversation. Uh, Out of this LA period, because as you say, I could do a whole episode with you. Who were like the best bands for you that you saw, or like shows that at least stand out to you as being something? And like you're there at an interesting time too, because like you're saying, it's post Mask, the beginning of what's considered the death throes of the first LA punk scene as the hardcore stuff is really taking over and the violence is coming in.
Absolutely. All of that was coming in. So a couple of important shows would have been Fear, Chiefs, and China White. That was
Oh my
fucking insane.
fucking God.
Right? I mean, that's just off the chain. And Fear, I saw Fear twice then. And the funny thing is I saw them do that show and then I saw Fear with Frank opening, which was killer. Frank had the Whiskey a Go-Go full of people singing Bingo, and I mean it was fucking awesome, right? It was like, followed up by Fear, and Fear's crowd was among the most aggressive I've ever seen. There, and at the time, all of the discussion was about HB, about Huntington Beach, big burly dudes, fighting, and the only time I think I witnessed anything like that was Circle Jerks crowd, Mad Society at the Starwood. That was also that was a very brutal show. Like that was like, I got out there and immediately got my ass handed to me in the pit and just left. Okay, okay. And it's funny because when Bill and Milo talk about that era, what they talk about is that before then, in the just that previous iteration, when it was still pogoing, when it was like more bumping and not like running into each other, that it was more, that's how they view that stuff. And once that other thing happened, they were like, nah, that was lame. That was when everything fell apart. And you'll hear that echoed from other people of that same period. And so I got there and it was more that thing. Another show I saw that was absolutely staggering was Dead Kennedys with just I fuck DH one of his first couple of shows. Um, so Dead Kennedys, Stains, and Neutron. Neutron became Battalion of Saints, and that was a ripping show. That was another one where I just got clocked right. I went out into it and I got clocked and just thought, okay, I'll hang in the back now. I definitely wasn't man enough to go in the pit with all of these big California guys, but those were amazing shows. Suburban Lawns, I got to see the Suburban Lawns, which is fucking cool because I mean nobody's seen this. They're like a mystery, because Sutishi just disappeared into the ether. We don't know where she went. Um,
So you
uh,
were checking out that kind of scene too, right? Because there's like almost like, and I love that other scene. There's almost a parallel scene that's happening at the same time. More power pop, I guess, pre-Paisley Underground, kind of like, kind of new wavy, I guess, too, a little more artier.
I didn't get to see as much of that as I probably that now I wish I could have. Like if I could have just happened upon 2020 or something, something bitching like that, that would have been fucking rad. By the way, there's a 2020 drummer. One of the 2020 drummers lives here in Tulsa. Isn't that weird? Like,
That's awesome. You
yeah,
guys should do a
yeah,
band.
Bill Belknap. I would like to. He plays in a cover band now, but he's a fucking good drummer. That guy, he's really good. He was my neighbor for a couple of years. Yeah, totally. So that stuff was happening, and but I was at the time. So I'll back up to Salt Lake for 1 second. And maybe this is a little bit different in your experience being in a larger city, but like, okay, the little availability of punk records at Cosmic Airplane, you don't know what any of it is. So all you can do is just buy a record and see what happens. And so there's no dividing line between Throbbing Gristle and Black Flag and fucking and The Last. And, it's all just sitting right there in front of you. And, you buy it based on whatever. You look at the cover for a few, you keep coming in and yeah, okay. Or you recognize something. Hey, well, fuck, I saw Paranoid Time and went, that's the same guy that drew the black, that drew Nervous Breakdown or whatever. Like so I bought that, and loved it or whatever. But there's, oh, SST. I keep seeing this name come up on these records I like. Eventually you start kind of building a little network in your head. But in the beginning, Gary Newman fits right in there next to Generation X. And, it's all just this big thing. If you're in some weird little town with no context of what these different things are, it's all punk rock. It's all the new shit. So, I was deeply invested in new wave music and, what would ultimately probably be power pop because the first record I got was Nevermind the Bollocks. The second one I got was and I know I bought it for the cover, was a compilation record called No Wave that was an A&M Records comp that had the Dickies, the Stranglers, the Police, Clark Kent, which is just Stuart Copeland, Squeeze, so it had this kind of weird smattering Dickies, like I said, that so it's kind of like it's punk, it's new wave, there's new wave stuff, there's basically just pop music on there, and I loved all of it. And everything from the song that's on there by Squeeze is like basically electronica almost, dun, 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 dun. It's almost like closer to Devo than it is to what we know as Squeeze doing, like Pulling Muscles from a Shell or something. And so, for me, all of that new wavy element is crucial to punk. That's what I loved in it. I, wasn't a hardcore kid, but then once I got into Black Flag and all that stuff, then I really focused in on that stuff, all the Southern California hardcore stuff, and eventually the other bands that are like Minor Threat made SOA, all of that, the other cities that were doing harder core stuff. That was more what I liked. And when I got to Los Angeles, I was looking for that, no question. And but in Los Angeles, the Go-Go's are critical to their punk identity. Like Bill and Milo were like, oh fuck yeah, we would never miss the Go-Go's. They were like our favorite. We loved them. So it was interesting. But I was really focused on the hardcore stuff. So I saw like Angry Samoans. I saw Modern Warfare, which I love.
What? You saw
Hot
Modern
Front.
Warfare?
Modern Warfare. Nobody even knows what I'm talking about if I say Modern.
Nothing left for me.
That's me.
Joan and I cover that. Joan and I have done a band that's covered that. I forget what, I don't think it's in Fucked Up, but
Is
Joan
that
and I,
right?
yeah, that's one of my favorite songs ever, dude. Holy shit.
I think those are great singles. Those couple of singles and the there was like the Hell Comes to Your House, that
That's
yeah,
the only
that's
output. And then there's an interview with them in Touch and Go issue 3, like that zine from Detroit that
yeah,
Tesco
yeah,
did,
yeah.
right?
I think those are great singles. Those couple of singles and the there was like the Hell Comes to Your House, that
That's
yeah,
the only
that's
output. And then there's an interview with them in Touch and Go issue 3, like that zine from Detroit that Tesco did, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that's the only place. Like, and then I found those records. I bought some records off a guy that worked at Clear Channel, very high up at Clear Channel, who used to be Bob Rock's assistant, and had this crazy punk record collection. And so I bought the second 7 inch off them, and that's the first place I ever heard them. And then, oh my God, wow,
Oh, that's
that's
crazy. Yeah, I mean, nobody even knows who they are, and I thought they were great. I loved Modern Warfare,
I
so that's
asked
cool.
so many
That
people
yes,
about them. I think I've asked everyone who's been on this, and like, wow, that's so fucking crazy. Like, what were they like live, and what was the audience reaction to it? Was it like, I know this is pushing memory banks way far, but
I remember it as like a very small kind of weird, weird show, and more like people just watching them. That's kind of my recollection of it, was just people are kind of like, checking it out or whatever, as opposed to where, they know the Angry Samoans, and, one's going to sing along or whatever. Give me Soper.
sorry,
Yeah,
there's
five,
just so
four, make it
much.
three, two. We actually do cover. We do a lot of. We don't cover. We've never done it live, but we have played at sound check. We do all kinds of stupid covers. I mean, we're always doing covers of some old. We do even. We. Do you remember the Cracks in the Sidewalk compilation?
Yes.
Right. The first place we hear Dez, and that version of Clocked In is sublime. It is fucking in Flag. Obviously, we could get into a whole discussion about that thing that sort of fell into my lap. But when I play Clocked In with Flag, I do my best to get every one of those noises because they just blew my mind. I mean, I've spent so much time going, where was he? Oh, there it is, right there. Like I tried to, and I think Dukowski was like, did you really just memorize every single fucking iota of Clocked In? Yeah. Every nuance. I give a shit this much. Anyway, but on the backside, there's this hilarious song on side two. Because remember, side two of Cracks in the Sidewalk, first side is, Minutemen, Black Flag, Second Trust. The other side is just this weird, arty, crazy shit. Some of it's Spot. One of them's like Greg Hurley. Um, and we do covers of those. Like we do the stupidest shit at Soundcheck. Hopefully the next time we come to Toronto. Well, I guess we'll be in Toronto soon, but it'll be just like a festival
Yeah,
show.
it's that big fest
So
thing. But
yeah,
that
so we won't get a chance to play like because and Bill made a great point about it. When we do these, like when we do that song, we do exploitation, what does it all mean? Like it's called Cowboy and Indian Scene. It's on side two of Cracks on the Sidewalk. When we do that, it's because like a place feels too stiff and weird and doesn't have like enough kind of punk vibe to it or something for us. Like it doesn't feel quite right. It's like too corporate or something. And so we'll do that, and we'll do like Germs covers and stuff to sort of cleanse the building, to make it like presentable for like, punk rock to be played in it. We christen the building.
I Because now I remember you guys doing, like, when we were on the tour together, you guys doing like some wild covers during sound checks on those tours. But I don't think you guys did an Angry Simone's cover. We covered Steak Knife with Chris Murphy singing.
Oh, wicked. Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, that's, you were mentioning somebody earlier, that, where like they're not known as a hardcore thing, but like, that's actually what their background is. And Chris is great that way, because Chris and I, we were talking about all these same kinds of bands. I didn't know Chris. I just met him maybe the last time we came up to Toronto. He was heading out, Sloan was heading out, and so we got together and just had coffee and shot the shit for a while. And of course, we're guys who love power pop, melodic music, but this is our background. This is where we actually come from.
He's one of the funniest people in the world. I
Oh
love that
God, he's
dude so
hilarious.
much.
I
Like,
love that guy. Yeah, he's fucking awesome. I haven't met the rest of those guys yet, but I hope to.
all punk and hardcore
Yeah,
kids.
totally. Yeah, it's funny because they actually did it. They recorded a Descendents cover.
Yeah, they like
I
he recently I went over to his house and he gave me a set list from a show you guys did in Montreal, I think with Fair Warning. And
My
he
it
had
was probably before me, because the first time he saw us, saw Descendants, was with Doug and Ray for
yeah,
sure. It
so that
was
must have been
before
that.
me.
But yeah, but I was wondering this. I think he saw you guys twice, and this might be from the second time. I looked up the show,
He
but
did see us twice. He did see us twice, is what I recall. Yeah, he's fucking awesome.
oh, he's the best. But he gave me a copy of the set list. He had two, And he's like, "Do you want this?" And I'm like, "Holy shit, yes!" One of the and
That's
when we were on
awesome.
that tour with you guys, I would send him pictures of me on side stage just to fuck with him every night.
Just like, hi,
Hey, here's what I'm doing
standing here
tonight.
watching these old guys
I'm
up
at
here going
work.
at it. Yeah.
I'm at work right now. How sick is this shit? You brought up the No Wave compilation and our mutual friends, Zach and Donnie Blair. That was their gateway to punk rock, too.
Yes, yeah, funny. We've talked about that a lot, a number of times because and it, funny too. An interesting thing is so like right before punk, I mean, the thing that was really turning my wheels was the Mahavishnu Orchestra, John McLaughlin. Like, I mean, the deepest fusion, right? That's where I was at. My guitar teacher got me into this, and it was like, this is like Hendrix only fucking jazz. It's just crazy, and I'm totally in love with it. And their dad, who died young, sadly, Zach and Donnie's dad was like a total mod. He listened to all that same shit that I was into right at that time. Larry Coryell, Jeff Beck, John McLaughlin. He was into all that stuff. I believe he might have even been a DJ, but he either one for sure. He was a deep record collector, and he turned those guys onto all that stuff. So it's funny when I got to know them, I think they were kind of like, this is weird because this guy, here's this dude who's in this band we love, but like he listens to all of our dad shit. So in a funny way, I mean, it wasn't too long after he died that, we got to know those guys. And I know we helped bridge a little bit of a, smooth, a rough path, that
That's
way.
yeah, like you guys meeting you guys, and like not that you and Carl are brothers, but like I find their journey to kind of finding a way out of their conservative little town very
Totally.
much kind of parallels your guys' journey, and like the Descendants are obviously a huge, and meeting you guys is such a huge, you know, almost more, maybe probably like more like TSOL to what you were saying with Massacre
Absolutely.
Guys.
Well, and then, when they came and did Rocks Your Lame Ass with us, which is a fuck,
Amazing
it's
record.
funny. It's a great record. And I mean, it was, we had just built the place. The only, we had done, we finished one of our records, Pommel. We finished it there. We did the drums elsewhere. We did all the rest of it there and then mixed it at a fancy studio. But then when we started the blasting room, first we did a band called Alligator Gun from Milwaukee, which is um, Scott Schoenbeck, who plays bass with Dashboard Confessional now. That was his band. And they were fucking they wrote some really good songs, and it was a weird kind of transitional period. They were just changing singers, and it was a little difficult record to make, but it came out really cool. Then the next band that came in was Hagfish, and we had such a great thing with that. And it's funny, I'll still put that record on, and I mean, this isn't, I'm not trying to like, oh yeah, I did that on a me, but like I mixed that record on like a $4,000 cheap ass Mackie console. And you can only do that one way. That is if the band is kicking major ass. You have to have, I mean, yes, you can record it through great stuff and then do the final mix, but I mean, this was recorded very, very in a very basic way. And they were such a good band. They played so well, and the songs are so good that it makes no difference. You can put it on, and yes, it's not going to be like, wicked crazy high fidelity, but it's a solid sounding record even now. And that's because they were fucking great. That's why both of the records, really. The other one too, the self-titled or whatever with the boxing glove in the
But
front.
Rock Your Lame Ass was like a key record for me. Like I heard them on a CMJ comp, and was like, holy shit! Like just as I'm getting into it, they were like one of the first bands that I'm like, this is awesome. And I think if they were from Southern California or they're from another place, I think that band would be, or on a different label probably would be more the situation. I think, especially at that time, like it would have been a different story on that first record. I mean, or that Cadillac Man, I guess is the first one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. Maybe that would have made its way around more. But they when they got Tony on drums, that was when it really, really super solidified because that guy's he's you very, very rarely will you meet somebody with more natural gift, and like a lot of people with a natural gift, he doesn't it can't drums alone can't hold his interest. He needs more because it just, that came fairly easily for him. He's just a fucking rock. Bill and I would just like, oh my God, this guy, God, he's so good. And then, we did this whole record. We recorded, we're at the very end, and we're all, yeah, this is a blast, we love it. And Zach's like, wait a minute, you didn't know this. Tony is like a full-on fucking like a Tommy Lee. He can just spin sticks. He's throwing shit around. And here, show him, Tony, and Tony's like, and we're just like, what? You're kidding me, because we thought he was just Tommy Price, like a rock solid badass.
Well, when you talk to them and you hear about that scene they kind of came out with Trippin' Daisy, it's almost like they were show bands. Like they would be put on this like package tour, like not to undercut the stuff they're doing because all these bands became successful out of this little like scene that they were a part of. But like, it seems like they had this promoter guy that would put them on the road together, and they would have to go out there and like dazzle crowds in a way that like if you're a punk band from your shitty scene, not to undercut would, but like you don't have to be able to do the Tommy Lee shit in the same sort of way or.
Yeah, that's true. And they, I mean, it's funny how many different things they've kind of, sort of figured their way into one way or the other, just like, oh, fuck, okay, whatever, and they're both, God, they're both just so good. And, Tony, what Tony does now, Tony makes, he makes beautiful furniture in his house. He's got, yeah, he builds incredibly beautiful furniture and shit. He's like a craftsman. It's fucking wild. Yeah. Those guys are all great. And George is doing music again, which is great.
Yeah,
Um,
Zach was mentioning.
yeah, so that's
I
awesome.
like, and the greatest story ever, of course, is the Zach Blair MVP ballad, right? You
I'm
know
not
this?
sure I know this
Oh,
story. I don't think
well, I'll
so.
have to cut this out.
That's
Saying
so awesome. That's kick ass. And how funny that it's like a whole Sherman, Texas weirdness.
100%.
God, that's funny.
It's such a crazy story. Anyway, that's like there's a whole episode with that where they got reconnected. Anyway, I won't bore you with that because
Dude, I'll give you a 1 second similar story, a really short one.
please.
There was like a boys reform school in Utah, and Pat Brown, like the Vandal song, Pat Brown, got sent to this place. And so Pat Brown used to come up, they'd give him like, okay, you can go out, but you have to be back. They'd give him these little windows where he could get out and go do stuff. And fucking Pat Brown was like part of our scene for like 4 months. He was the nicest guy. He was a totally great guy. You could tell that he was an absolute fucking wild man. But anyway, like Pat Brown ended up like, it's kind of almost funny, like just that, you mentioned that, just the way that kind of weird thing can unfold that, and then like down the road, you go, wait a minute, you put these two connections together. Anyway, yeah, Pat Brown was a local guy.
Before we leave Utah era and get to the other stuff, that's fucking wild. But before we leave the Utah scene and go to DC, fuck, this is going to be like 7 hours by the time we're done this stuff, and I apologize.
Fucking for sure. We may have to do this in a few. Right.
Is it true you were in the Philadelphia experiment?
Yes, yes. So here's what happened. This is when I was already kind of like, I think that was
84.
1984. Yeah. So I'm already like less overtly punk looking. I mean, clearly I don't look like a normal dude, but I wasn't, I was like less blue mohawky at this time. But I'm standing at a salad bar, and I'm making a salad, and this woman comes up to me and she goes, "Hi, I'm a casting director, and I am looking for a punk rocker for this, big movie that's being shot. Are you up for that?" And I'm like, "Fuck, okay, sure, great." So we exchange phone numbers, and she calls me later and is like, okay, there's going to be an audition down at it's in the lobby of this big hotel, big fancy hotel in Salt Lake. So I go to this thing, and there's all these actors, and they've got like they've got like punk haircuts, right? And so, I come in and sign, and so have to sign this book saying, oh, it's me, and I can see that like everybody else has an agent, and I wrote independent, because I don't, I'm like, I don't know what to write here. I don't have an agent, and I just write independent. So I wrote independent, and so I walk in, to the, it's like I'm called up and I go in and they're like, "Do you know how to drive?" Yes. Um, okay, you're in. Like it was like I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. And and they just looked at me and went, "Oh, it's a real punk rocker. Okay, fine. We'll just have the real punk rocker do it instead of the actors." Because, I mean, there wasn't even, so and there's a reason for this as I figure out later, which is so then the day comes to go do the shoot, and the shoot is done in Tooele, Utah, where there had been a military installation of some kind. And they had, I think, maybe the night before they had blown it up or something like, or, oh no, that I think that was actually in Nevada. Anyway, so we're sitting out there in Tooele, Utah. This is the Salt Flats, more or less. And then 19 semi trucks roll up, right? I'm sitting there and let me back up. On the way down from Salt Lake to Tooele, I don't remember how long a drive this is, hour to hour, a little bit over an hour, something like that. I'm listening to on my Walkman Machine Gun Etiquette. Right. And so I have been listening to Love Song, right, of course, because that right. Um, and so, we get there a little early to the site, all these trucks pull up and there's all this to do or whatever. And then so now it's my time to film. And they say, okay, here's what we're gonna do. They flag this guy down who has this beat up car. Hey, can we use your car in this movie? And like this guy will drive it. And it's like, yeah, but it only goes in one gear. It's only goes in first. And I'm like, that's fine. I'll drive it. So the thing is I'm supposed to drive up to a gas pump, get out of the car, say something, and then walk into the thing. Now, I know for sure I look back on it now and I realize what they wanted was they wanted to get a punk rocker because they wanted me to go, fuck you, what are you looking at, bugger? Or some kind of a thing like that, take a picture, it'll last longer, something like that a punk rocker would say. Instead, what's in my, they go, so I get out of the car, they go, say something. And I go, hey man, what's happening? Which is from love song,
Yeah.
right? Hey man, what's happening? And then the cool bass part starts. And so that's what pops out of my mouth. And all of the director, all the people, they just burst. Oh, that was so awesome. And that was it. I mean, my whole effort is all of about, 3 minutes time, and I got paid like $1,000 ultimately and became eligible for because I did a speaking part. If I wanted to join the Screen Actors Guild, I could. I was like Taft Hartley, or whatever, or something. So that made me eligible to be like an actor if I wanted to pay those kind of dues or had any acting talent, which I don't. But it was just this fucking hilarious, weird moment.
That's awesome. Well, get ready for some Kevin Bacon shit. Michael Paré, star of Philadelphia Experiment, was also in the film The Virgin Suicides.
I've never seen this.
Okay, yeah, it's Sofia Coppola's film.
Oh, and
Um,
she's known to
yeah,
be awesome.
yeah, and it's her first film. It was shot up in Toronto. Josh Hartnett plays one of the adult versions of one of these kids, but these kids featured a very young actor by the name of Noah Shabib, aka OVO 40, Drake's producer. And
Oh,
Noah Shabib and I were in a high school movie together. So you and me, through some Kevin Bacon shit, are connected.
are connected. This is wicked. Well, let's see. So, like, how does this connect you to the next part of this? Well, no, that's pretty awesome. There's here's another bit of trivia of since we've kind of side moved over into movies. So when my when I was a kid, I was born Stephen. I changed my last name is actually O'Reilly, and it's a very long story how I ended up being Stephen Egerton. But my real name is Stephen O'Reilly. That's what my birth name, whatever. And my nickname was Stevo. And so if you've ever seen the movie SLC Punk, you will know that the main character is named Stevo. That is because the guy who wrote that movie, James Marandino, who's a guy that I had just met a couple, kind of casually a couple of times in the old Salt Lake scene. He was a little bit younger than me, and I'd run into him at parties, kind of a deal. But the movie is in no way about me, but he liked my nickname, and he actually like got a hold of me and said, "Can I use your nickname for this movie?" And I was like, look, can I see a script so I can see if, if my name is, turns into it like a total asshole thing. And so I liked, the script was funny, it was cool. And so, oh hell yeah, go for it. So anyway, if I'm Stevo, but only I'm not it's Stevo at all. It's actually, I think, most largely an autobiography, or at least partially an autobiographical vibe. Anyway, so movies, yeah, that's funny movie
Well, I
shit.
wanted to bring that up because, like, I remember when that film came out. At the time, I was doing a community radio show on a thing with Sandy, who was future member of Fucked Up, and we were talking about that movie and giving our reviews. And during that moment, I was super into Clear, very much aware of Salt Lake City having this bustling straight edge scene. And I was like, oh, this film is not at all accurate to probably what it was like. Hardcore and straight edge was already happening by this point. I'm sure there would have been hardcore and straight edge kids in there. But now, knowing what I do about the scene, certainly after our conversation, I realized that film was probably a lot closer to the reality than my 14-year or 16-year-old self ever gave it credit for being.
That may be true because it was definitely like that became a feature, and certainly straight edge. I mean, I had mentioned earlier that, eventually, the DC singles started to make it our way, which was, the first time we'd ever heard of straight edge, and everybody in our scene was not straight edge. It really, or, there was none of that I certainly not by name, certainly not by, there was no defined idea of it at all. If anything, maybe somebody wasn't that into drugs or something, but that sort of blew that door open. But I don't know that many people walked through it in our town for quite a while.
Yeah.
Even though we loved the music. I mean, Minor Threat played in a fraternity, in the basement of a fraternity house in Salt Lake City. Massacre Guys opened, and um which is, it's kind of funny because this was there was a great venue in Norwalk, Connecticut, the Anthrax, that was there
Yes.
for years, run by a pair of brothers, Brian and Sean, I believe. And I believe it was Brian. I don't remember which brother it was now, but one of them was the president of this fraternity house at the University of Utah. It just so happens, and he brought Legal Weapon there. We did a lot of local shows there, and he brought Minor Threat there, which is fucking amazing to think about now. I have a flyer from it somewhere. Um, and this is, I believe, it was five man Minor Threat. Um, and the whole place, I mean, it's just, it's a bar. It's basically a bar. Everyone's smoking, poor Ian's down there just getting his ass handed to him, by it, just, trying to sing or whatever, but I mean, I'm sure he was used to that. I mean, this concept, I mean, it really was foreign to most, probably a lot of the scenes like ours that were really built up of, real fringy people, you know what I mean,
Hmm.
that were, or people that were really struggling with aspects of religion and that kind of thing, conservatism around them.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting with Straight Edge and Riot Girl, which I think are the two biggest sort of movements, or two of the bigger movements that kind of come out of punk. But both of them seemingly are spread not so much by the initial bands, being Bikini Kill, I guess, and Minor Threat, but by sort of the next band being for SSD, for Straight Edge certainly, and for Riot Girl probably Bratmobile being the ones that really kind
Uh-huh.
of exported it beyond that. And I feels like it was something that, yeah, spread, like straight edge culture spread slowly and really doesn't seem to really spread in a big way until like late 80s, 87. That's where we had our first real straight edge bands up here in Toronto.
It's funny because that's probably right, right about when it would have been happening at Salt Lake. Like that would have been, I'm guessing that the Speedway Cafe probably opened in 95, or sorry, 86, 80, 80, would have been not right after I left. It wasn't long after I left that it opened up. And I know a lot of the bands, like you would have probably heard of like Iceburn, which I don't know that Iceburn would have been a straight edge band, but I know there was a lot of that around there that was going on, the straight edge bands. And really, to look at it, like to think about it now, I kind of would think that it was probably real good for Salt Lake to have that because it gave it, it offered, a place of expression and community for people that didn't want to head down that path, which I think, was really nationwide, that I have to be honest, I've never, I would have, I grew up in the 70s, weed was normal. It was just everywhere. It was just normalized, and so the idea of not doing drugs as a not a goal, but like as a structure, as a thing to do, to actively pursue, and that it might have some benefits never occurred to any of us. Like, God, that's fucking not a bad idea. That kind of makes sense in a way. Like that's really and I think I mean, ultimately I was able to, although I was never, able to go down that path myself, that wasn't my thing, but I certainly was able to go, yeah, cool. Straight edge. I'm glad we got that. That's good. That probably helps a fucking lot of people.
What an amazing trend, especially now that I'm a parent, for a kid to fall into for their teenage years. Like,
Absolutely.
and it is something that is so positive and it's religious free. Like you don't have to. There's no other dogma necessarily attached to it other than you don't do this. But that's the thing I find with a lot of these things. And you look at 12-step programs, you look at people that are sober because of their religious beliefs. A lot of it is about leaning onto something, and that's I think ultimately what straight edge gave is a way to it gave us something to lean on, or gave people something to lean on. Not straight edge, I don't know, us gave people something to lean on that wasn't attached to a religion, that wasn't attached to like a 12-step program or some sort of other ideology.
Right, absolutely. And also sort of, for a kid entering a punk scene like ours in Salt Lake that was actually pretty kind of druggy and drinky and, very, let's go the opposite way from the norms of our city. It made it okay for them to not have to go down paths that they didn't feel comfortable going down that were surrounding them. It's like, God, I love things about this, this environment, this community, and but these little features of it, the drugs, drinking, like that's not my thing. I don't want it. It offered that availability and probably to good effect for a lot of people that kind of went, fuck, maybe I'd be better off without this because more, I've gotten myself in trouble with these things. Fuck, power to it. It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I definitely. Oh, and Insight's the pre-Iceburn band.
Insight. So that so we came through to play and Iceburn played with us at least once in all. And um
That'd be a
I
cool show. I
remember
could see you guys fitting together really well, like through the jazzier leanings.
absolutely, absolutely. And fuck, I think Gentry even played a Dan Armstrong, whatever, which I was playing at the time. Like it's just kind of funny. I might have even had, dude, that's awesome. You play one of those too. So yeah, that's pretty funny. But I was totally unaware of all of the bands there because I was in a whole different, world by then. And the funny thing is like during let's call it a low ebb of my life, towards the end of my punk rock time, I not the end of it. I can't. That's not fair because I'm still involved in it now. But like yeah, but like what happened there, and this is where I kind of left a certain part of my person kind of in the past and sort of redirected myself somewhat. Is that I was played a record by the fantastic classical guitarists, John Williams and Julian Bream, a live record where I heard a piece of music called Asturias that just blew my head apart. And I went, I got to learn how to do this. I got rid of all my electric guitars, all my shit. I got a classical guitar and I just launched way out of the scene I was in. And that's where I was when I moved to DC. I didn't move to DC like, oh yeah, but I did end up, I played in a band very briefly with Sab Gray from Iron Cross. Sab and our friend Eric Walgren. He was in a band called Underground Soldier, and then
Who
the
she's
original.
she's one of the best vocalists ever, the singer of Underground Soldier. She's got such a crazy
Yeah,
good
Underground
voice.
Soldier was cool. Yeah, they were that was a cool band, and the bass player was the original bassist from Black Market Baby. And so we had this very brief little thing that we just did like a small handful of shows. Um, and so I was immersed in that scene to an extent, but my main thing that I was into there was I was studying classical guitar with the hopes of trying to catch up. I didn't know anything about music. I couldn't read, nothing, and so I'm trying to like dive into this thing I know nothing about. And it helped me at a critical time, like to put in hours upon hours and focus myself. And I found a great teacher there who taught me a bunch of stuff and and I was trying to work towards the goal of getting into the Peabody Music Conservatory in Baltimore to try to just head down this path. I wanted to learn how to fucking be a real musician. That was what I wanted. Um, so anyway, that was sort of my exit from Salt Lake, was that I left with no electric guitars or anything like that. I had one amp left in my folks' basement or whatever. And other than that, everything, I got rid of all of it. And I bought a classical guitar and I was just going to try to do that. And that's it. So, getting to DC, I happened upon, that unfolded to where I was like somewhat, I was seeing all these shows and connected to it, but like that wasn't at all the goal. Weird.
Because you arrive in DC, man. I haven't asked you about Toxic Shock or Unclean Records, but I feel like we're gonna have to do part twos and threes at some point because I gotta ask you about this. But you've Auto da Fe, right?
Auto da Fe. Yeah, that was our little band. Yeah.
Which is you're arriving in DC at a really interesting point in '85, where it's Revolution Summer has happened, and I think Sab being in Iron Cross and so closely associated with the skinhead stuff, I was wondering if there was any because you guys only played like I guess a handful of shows, if that, right?
Yeah. Three, 4 shows. Yeah.
Where did you guys kind of fit in? Because he's also someone who's gone on record as saying that he never liked Revolution Summer.
Well, when I met Sab, I'll back up to say that Sab, it's like if your only perception of Sab would have come from like, either the idea of Iron Cross or, their song on Flex Your Head or whatever, then you might not get the full breadth of this guy, which is that he has an insane knowledge of music, a mammoth and wide record collection. And yes, he loved all the skinhead music, but this guy, when I was getting to know him, he loved he loved great rockabilly. He loved the cult. He loved all he was into all kinds of shit. And who he turned me on to, who I loved, and you would never think he was a huge fan of, is 9353.
Oh
Right?
yeah, that band fucking rules.
Yeah, they're awesome. And Sab listened to everything. I mean, Sab was he's a deeply intelligent, he's a book reader, he's a fucking cool guy. Sab is a great dude. And um, so it was kind of, it was neat for us because, it was TSOL that introduced us. They knew him and I had just gotten out there. TSOL came through. I came down to the show and we're hanging out and they're like, "Hey, you fucking Sab, you need to know this guy. Like you guys would be cool together, whatever." So we oh yeah, we exchanged numbers and we put this band together. Sab knew the other guys, Eric and Paul. I haven't seen Paul since then, but Eric I'm still great friends with. And so we had this little thing where I think we played like one time live on the radio, and we opened for Black Market Baby once. We played with Dickies. Maybe we did one other show or something like that. Not very much. um but we it was a great time. It was really cool, to get to do that. He was awesome, really good dude.
Yeah, like and obviously, I didn't mean to imply that he was just this sort of
Oh
character
no,
for
no,
that
it's just
period.
like it's just it's interesting to know that, some of us that are, hyper identified with a certain thing or, of a whole broader sphere. And Sab is definitely one of those guys with way much under the hood that you would probably never know if you just, saw the surface level thing of
Hmm.
it.
Hmm. But where did the band play? Because like it is Revolution Summer happening at that point, but there's also like a very storied not necessarily in a good way, thing happening in that area with Lefty and sort of the skinhead stuff and the violence it shows. So, where would you guys, as this band, which has sort of this historical baggage surrounding the singer, who's, as you're saying, is multifaceted, not necessarily down with that, but also at the same time, there's this other thing that's kind of rising, which is not necessarily what is oppositional to this sort of other thing that's
He
happening.
when I was there, he was, of course, respected amongst, the other skinhead people around Lefty and so on. Like Lefty, Lefty was not going to be fucking with Sab Gray. You know what I mean? Like, she was like, okay, but there were other characters around, complicated characters. And, in a funny way, he had a way of shepherding that thing because he was like, this isn't how we do this kind almost, you know what I mean? Not like he was dictatorial in some way. That sounds wrong, but I'm just saying that it was like, lead by example, like Sab led by example. He was like not the kind of person he wasn't fighting fights. There was nothing like that. But by the time I got to know him, all of that stuff was pretty far behind him. And to be fair, I didn't encounter a lot of it when we were playing. The shows we played were at the 930 Club. So yes, these characters, Lefty and some of the other, there were a couple other, I wish I could remember their names now, but a couple of guys that, were kind of dickheads. But they were like respectful, but not connected. He wasn't really part of it in that way by the time I got there.
What'd you guys sound like musically? I want to hear this so
Well,
fucking bad. How is
funny,
this not being reissued? Or like, it's
it
impossible to
was
find.
never recorded.
Well, the
There was
radio
never any, there
session,
was the radio session. I wonder about that. I don't know if the radio session was recorded.
is that one university that used to like Minor Threat did one there? Like they kept
Yeah.
everything, I'm sure.
Yeah, if there is anything, it's from there. W something SU. It's on the tip of my tongue. But there might have been, but I never had a copy, and I don't think any of the rest of us did either. But something, now that you're saying it, something does suggest maybe there was at a time a copy of it, but none of the band had it. So if anything, it was like just a completely random happenstance that somebody would have caught it. And KXLU,
KXLU, yes, we played on there before.
KXLU.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that
I think that's what it was KXLU.
I'm gonna have
And
some DC friends after this, and I'm gonna get some friends on the case of this because this has got to be found and heard.
yeah, it would be interesting because one of the Descendants all songs, uh the song that became Iceman Cometh was actually something that we were doing in Auto da Fe. That made do 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 that weird kind of waltzy riff. That was We were playing that in some context, and I wish I could remember more about it. About where we were songwriting wise. We didn't have that many songs. It was pretty underdeveloped. We were just kind of getting there, and then I was really focused elsewhere, and I was still coming out of a pretty rough patch, and so I wasn't too well off then, and I think the thing just kind of fizzled. It wasn't like there was no anger, there was no breakup, there was nothing like that. It just kind of just sort of dissolved in some way, and we didn't have you got to have a place to do these things, practice, and I think we were fairly scattered. A couple guys were in Maryland, and not that DC it's dense. It's not an easy. I think I was at one point I was living with Sab in Alexandria. So we were fairly spread out, and so we only did those couple of shows, and that was it. And then I was really wanting to do the classical thing then. So for my part, I was, probably not as invested in it as nobody was that invested in it. I don't think, it was just kind of a fun thing that fell into place. Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting, not just punk, but music, obviously from that kind of area, DC, around that time in the mid '80s. Like, did you go to go-go shows at all, or see any of those shows?
Yes. Fuck yes. It was interesting because you'd know about those kind of weird shows where they'd put together the two scenes, which was really interesting. And I thought go-go was fascinating. And I mean, it was I went to a couple of go-go shows, which was not common for a dude who looked like I did. And it was a little intense, but it was, I didn't, there were no ill effects. It wasn't, I wasn't driven off or anything like that. It was, and, but then also some of those bands were playing at 930 Club too, which I frequented. So, um, so that was a cool and vibrant and interesting scene and at its peak right then. I mean, you could walk down the street, you would walk down the street and just, kids would be selling cassettes they'd made and that kind of thing. And it was a vital, really huge, cool thing for DC, for the young, it was like a parallel to our thing, really, you know, from what I could tell. I mean, that's the vibe I always had from it. Got to see Trouble Funk. I saw Rare Essence. I saw Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers. And they were all just fucking fantastic. They're incredible bands. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
What about bands like United Mutation and Bloody Mannequin Orchestra? And there's like almost like more of a Baltimore arty kind of scene that's happening around the same time. Do you ever pick up any of that stuff?
I I was too outside, it's funny. I had a connection at 930 Club, so I went to a lot, but during that year, I was only there about a year and 3 months, and then I ended up in Descendants and leaving. And while I was frequenting 930 Club, I saw everything from Levon Helm. I saw Replacements. I saw Steve Earle. I saw, all this. I saw Sham 69 when they were kind of doing like their saxophony weird phase. I saw Pete Shelley solo. I saw the Bad Brains, two shows of the Eye Against Eye record release party. That was fucking absolutely insane. All these other Rasta dudes, got up there with them, and they're doing Day Tripper, and everybody's smoking spliffs, and Ian's in the middle singing with them. It was just, totally wild, a totally wild time. But it was, 930 played, yeah, it probably leaned on punk. I saw X, five-man X with No Billy Zoom with Dave Alvin and Tony Gilkison on guitar. There was just all kinds of cool shit coming through there. I saw so many amazing shows, but it was a wide berth of shows. That's how, and like Trouble Funk, so all these different things were happening, local and otherwise. I saw 9353 there. And I did go several times to DC Space, which was another, classic venue. That actually the first time I went there, Sab and I went to go see 9353 there. He's like, "Oh, we're going to see 9353. These guys are fucking awesome." And they were. And it was, that was the place you wanted to see 9353. Yeah, so when I was going to shows there was food for thought. I saw Embrace on the rooftop of Food for Thought. I saw, I think that's where I saw them. Um, so, I saw this weird range of shows, but I wasn't immersed, it was really more like I was going to the 930 all the time and seeing whatever was rolling through there, which was this massive, wide berth of different stuff, including a lot of great punk shows.
It's such a wild scene because I think, and this isn't obviously Discord's fault, but so much of like the oxygen for the history of that place in punk is given to Discord and Discord's machinations and movements throughout kind of punk history, but there's so much more just in punk that's happening at the same time, like that is it's fascinating and kind of overlooked a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I would have loved to have known more about, the scene that spawned 9353. There was another band with one of those guys called The Factory that was kind of an interesting thing. I saw them at least once. Um, one interesting aside from my brief time there is that I jammed twice with the band Dove, which was a guy named Stuart Casson who played in the Meatmen at one point, and then he ended up moving to LA. Stuart is a absolutely staggering guitarist. And Pete Moffat, young Pete Moffat pre GI, pre everything we know him to have done since. And we're still pals. And Ben Pape was the bass player. I saw him maybe at one point he was in God, I can't think of who he might have. He joined somebody later. I ran into him, after I was in Descendants. Um, yeah. So anyway, so I'll give you another quick, funny, like weird little thing that happened while during my time in DC. When I first got the reason I ended up in DC at all was that I'd been having a rough patch. My my uncle lived in Manassas, Virginia, not too far outside of DC. And so I went out to stay with my uncle for the summer. And while I was there, I met this fellow named Daniel. Everybody called him Bug. And I and a couple of his buddies. And they were kind of the couple of the only people in Manassas, Virginia at that time, which was pre it becoming a big tech mecca or whatever. It was a more ruralish kind of an area, very Virginia, very steeped in the Manassas battlefield and that kind of a thing, right? And so I meet this fella and become really good friends with him, and I'm hanging out with him regularly, and and he's a backhoe operator, right? He's born of redneck stock, let's call it, or
Okay,
whatever.
yeah.
And but he's into punk rock, and he's especially the Ramones and that kind of stuff. Anyway, one night we're going up to see TSOL, which is the show where I was introduced to Sab, as it turns out. And on the way up there, his friend Alan, we called Alan Gooch. He's like, maybe you'll know what this is. We have this tape, and all it says on the tape is Milo goes to college. They don't know who it is. They just know that they love this tape that they have. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is the Descendants. I love this band. These guys are awesome. And we're listening to the Descendants on our way. Anyway, within within a year, I was in the band. That was just fucking weird that it worked out like that. And so right before I leave, I visit with Daniel Bug, and Bug's like, "Hey, I'm going to come out there and be your roadie." And he had roadied for us a little bit, the little bit that Otto da Fe did. Bug was the guy that drove our equipment around and helped us set it up, right? His dream job, what he wanted more than anything, was to be a roadie, and he not a tech, a roadie. There's a distinction, and he wanted that. And so right before I leave to go to LA after I've joined Descendants, he's like, I'm going to come out there and be your roadie. I was like, yeah, okay, sounds good. I'll see you there, whatever. So 3 weeks later, he just shows up in Los Angeles. And I'm like, oh, fuck. And Bill's like, so who is this guy? And I'm like, I got to explain. He's met this dude. And he's like, he's great. I love him. And Bill, to his credit, is like, okay, fine, get in. And so we get in it. And when I joined, when Carl and I joined, Carl had been there for about a month before me, and so we had a small amount of shows booked around the Thanksgiving time in 1986. They were shows that Doug and Ray would have done, but that Doug and Ray had left the band, and so we had kind of stepped in by then. And so Daniel gets in with us, and Daniel is a guy who is used to maintaining machines. He knows all the practical shit that dumb punk guys and book readers and smarty pants guys like us don't know a fucking thing about. And he made himself absolutely invaluable. And he was our roadie for the next 17 years. So so it's kind of funny. Like, one thing that I brought with me to the band from my time in DC was Bug, and in the early days, his best friend, Alan Gooch. Gooch kind of did more like the tour managey stuff. He had a good business sensibility about him, so he maintained our like $5 a day or whatever. And and then Bug like made sure, Bug was real professional about it. He was interesting. He was like, he didn't like people being up on stage. He wanted the show. He's like, this is a fucking rock and roll show. It was important to him. This is holy ground. We do this right. We don't, this isn't bullshit, So it was kind of, he brought a weird air of professionalism that we were kind of not even clued into because we're just dumb punk kids. So anyway, that was just a funny part of my time in DC. He was one of he and Alan were among the most important features of my time there for sure.
It feels like when you go out west and you wind up obviously being in the Descendants and everything, it's almost like, and I talked a lot with Bill about this, but like this sort of like SST version of punk that is different. Like it feels like they were the first, one of the first groups to kind of be like, ah, we're out of this hardcore thing. I think Red Cross was probably first, and then I think you can tell that there's a point, even as a fan, I noticed there's a point where they were like, and then I think probably it feels like everyone was like, we're not part of this thing, but because of that, it develops in its own way, and there's like its own culture to it, and I really feel like Descendants and all are products of that, or am I making this all up?
Well, there is some truth to that because since Descendants didn't really play the game with, I mean they weren't, they weren't like completely enmeshed in all of that stuff. They brought in their weird fishing thing and their kind of funny songs, and they they felt somewhat outside of even the scene they were completely involved in. I mean, they really felt somewhat as being outsiders in that. Hence, songs like "I'm Not a Punk." Like, there was a certain lack of acceptance. They were at the church right along there with, they were practicing right next, in the same. Fuck, Bill lived in the church when they did the Decline, but yet the Descendants aren't ever brought into the picture because they're just kind of outside. They're just kind of weird. So we focus on the more on these more dramatic, things, either look wise or attitude, funny jokes from Fear or, intensity of Black Flag, whatever. But, Descendants are right there in the middle of that part of it and completely left out, and so I think they felt a certain connection and a certain disconnection to it. And so, so there wasn't, I don't know that there was ever, I think maybe they felt a little like kind of rebuffed by, the sort of greater scene in Los Angeles. But when I got there, when I got there the first time in 81, what I hadn't realized was that there was not only a distance divide between Black Flag and the Germs and the adolescents all being very far away from each other. These scenes were really fragmented, and not I thought there's this cohesive Los Angeles punk rock scene. That's not really what it's like. There's there's the OC scene, and there's with the Crowd and the TSOL, and those bands down there, and then there's the Hollywood stuff, and there was a certain exclusionary thing from the Hollywood scene that didn't really easily allow the South Bay thing into it. And there were these weird little, and I was not used to that. Normally, fuck, in every city I'd ever seen, you have to band together. You know what I mean? To get enough people to even support having a show, was an effort. So, so it was kind of funny, and there was probably, so let's just say that, like, in that scene, it was already somewhat fragmented, and maybe, there was underlying feeling that, like, the Hollywood bands were more, walking the walk with all the hair and the looks, and the South Bay bands were not doing that, and that kind of stuff. So there was weird little stupid micro differences between these things. And I'm sure that at a time that probably was a thing for Descendants for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like scenes hit a critical mass point when they get big enough. And LA obviously being so big at all, not LA being the whole Southern California, all the way up to Northern California, really. I mean, I guess every town seems to have punk stuff going on pretty much. And when these scenes get so big, they're gonna fracture, and I think that's when it gets amazing. Like I didn't live through it, so I didn't know Lefty, and I didn't get to experience. But Lefty's impact and influence on punk rock is immense because from the way the story's told, that leads to Revolution Summer and a whole other splinter of stuff starting from it. And then there's still like this sort of hardcore stuff, which I guess moves more to Baltimore as that time period goes on. And I think you see the same thing happen in Los Angeles. Once again, not to glorify the violence that happens, but Paisley Underground or the country kind of punk crossover thing that kind of happens, or uh,
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of new scenes kind of spring up as it fractures off into this different little worlds.
And I suppose it did that, I suppose it did that everywhere. And I think, the part that the piece of it I enjoy the most is probably that thing like we were talking about when I lived in Salt Lake, where we just had no fucking idea,
Yeah, the music's better
that
that
like
way.
Yeah, it kind of is. I mean, like the Shockabilly just sits right there next to next to the industrial, or whatever. Like it's just all right in there, and I mean, like Gary Newman, fuck, I was a huge Gary Replicas, one of my favorite records ever. And, so it's like all of these, there was all this kind of intertwined thing. And then to find out, really in some of those really big scenes where there was, like Los Angeles or something like, which I guess maybe is kind of an unusual, thing because we could look at Southern California as including, Orange County, and you go, wow, really? These things are all different, and these guys aren't all just playing the same clubs, and they're not all friends, and there's all, and then we have like, all these little weird subdivided pie of punk rock, with like, people are into Spandau Ballet, and these guys are into the, all whatever. Just, interesting how divided up it was. And maybe that's just like a young person thing or something like
I,
that.
I think I
Maybe.
think back then it was, you had to kind of divide it up a little bit more too because you could only make so many economic choices on what you're going to go to, and it
That's a
mattered a,
great point.
and how we dressed was like such a codify signifier, especially in scenes where money was a little more common, where it was like kind of like judged on how people dressed and are you dressing punk enough? Are
Absolutely.
you dressing in the right shoes?
Right. Availability of all of that stuff,
Yeah,
like, I mean, and if you lived in Hollywood, you could go down to Poser and buy a kilt. I did. I mean, or whatever. You know,
yeah. The thing is, there are always these things that I don't know. At least I hope they aren't as important in scenes anymore. They don't seem to be. Like this weekend when we were at that punk rock bowling festival. Obviously, that's a big giant festival, but at the same time, like everyone loved everything, and a Madball show can happen in the same space as a 999 show, as a chat show, as Descendants and Madness and all, and everyone had a good time.
and everyone loved it. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I really enjoy that is one thing about these like kind of big festivals that we're all, sort of, that it's landed like this, that you get that rad variety like that. That to me is just awesome. I love that. The amount of, the sheer amount of different shit that, and I don't even I'm there to see stuff and hang out, but I had my wife and good friends with me. So, we're spending time away from that. We're, oh, we got to go see this, and so over the course of seeing everything from, John Doe to yeah, to Madness, Devo. I'm never gonna miss Devo. They're fucking awesome.
Yeah, Billy Bragg on the rooftop of a casino as people are splashing
Yeah,
around in a pool.
totally weird. That was
It was so
hilarious. That
weird.
was very strange, but very cool.
Very cool. He
Yeah.
was super. I just was. You talk about someone who just is like the embodiment of what I hope I could always kind of try and be. Not that I've ever going to achieve that level of success, but I mean, like, in terms of being that present and just like that, like, cool and unaffected
Yeah,
by
trying to be like almost like an info conduit, idea conduit, vibe or whatever. Yeah, that part of it is excellent. As opposed to just like, oh, here's some great songs or something, you know what I mean? But his thing is a whole different channel.
And I think it's interesting because I think we're talking about Sab and sort of the character that's put onto you by your this period of your life that ultimately is very brief, but obviously hugely impactful on large groups of people around the world. And so it kind of becomes a character. And Milo definitely has that character that's kind of been put on him over the years in
Yeah.
terms of stuff. And then uh, Billy Bragg's almost someone who, and not that Milo's leaned into the character at all. I think Milo's almost just, been Milo the whole time. But I think in the same way, Billy Bragg is almost like, I feel like, tried to resist that character, which is almost like, I guess, an active way of trying to interact with it, where you're just constantly trying to break it down and be like, no, no, I'm just this dude. I'm just this fucking dude.
Yeah. And I think that's a good, that's a maybe a good thing to do, to be able to look at that and go, it's real easy for people to, start writing dialogue into this thing that's, just like a guy, really. And it's sweet that people care enough to even give a shit, I mean, you're, in one way you're very lucky, but it's also, to me, real good if you have the opportunity to break down that stuff and just go, oh wow, this is incredibly, human, incredibly normal, and just, these are just some dudes, or whatever.
Yeah, because
Like,
yeah, what you're saying with about TSOL and your experience with them is completely in contrast to the historical character that certain members have even leaned into in quotes they've said in movies and in books, where, from what you're saying, that's not the side that was ever something you saw.
well, no, I mean, I did see that side of them, but I mean, in TSOL's case, I see this as like, this is the growth of troubled people. You know what I mean? This is the growth outward of troubled people, like, figuring themselves out. And, really that piece of punk, is massive. If you look at the amount of people that you and I are, just social media friends with, that like maybe had complicated periods, sorted themselves out, heavily using this like weird happenstance of our time and era to sort of help, guide them through a messy youth or whatever. That's fucking awesome. I mean, that may be one of punk's, unsold greatest, accomplishments, is that it if you look at the amount of people that came out the other end of it, pretty cool people. That's fucking rad. Like great. And maybe other. I don't know enough about hippies really to know whether that same thing was true for the hippies. Maybe the same thing worked that way. But I can certainly look at our, or beatniks or whoever, whatever, like, little bubblings of the society at that time to, but really ultimately we get to help, we get to sort ourselves out and hopefully come out at the other end, better, decent, and it seems to have happened to a large swath of people that were involved in bands and so on. Tons.
Yeah, and I think like, well, Steve Albini, rest in peace. I think his recent years where he kind of like had a coming to it moment and accepting things and admitting that there's change. Like I think that path to redemption of someone has to be there, because if not, it's we're just exploiting people's mental health and then just not giving them a chance to try and become a different person.
Absolutely. I mean, we just, it's real easy to, we're an easy band to sort of tear into, things that were just commonplace usage of, that you don't know are hurtful, like just it's growing up. You learn, ah, fuck, I shouldn't have said that. That was really fucking stupid. You know what I mean? Like, and that was mean. I didn't mean it to be mean. I wasn't even thinking about that. Sorry, dudes. That's kind of, all of us, prickly people who have whatever going on that we have to sort out. This is part of that, and it's
And
killer.
Milo changed those lyrics years ago. I remember him just being very, like shit, change it, and it
Yeah,
wasn't.
he tried to, but nobody, but there's always the piece of punk rock, and I accept it. It's there, but there's the piece of it where it's like the whole stated goal is the middle finger and the just, and without any real context for the middle finger. It's just the middle finger, and so the people that feel that that is a noble trade or a worthwhile trade, wouldn't play along with that. So eventually we just went, nah, we're not even offering that, possibility. Because that was not, I mean, anybody that really knew us knew that that was not, part of our thing. That had nothing to do with anything. It was just sort of lands there. And we're just one of 1,000 bands that did the same thing that way.
I, it definitely, it's become like a thing. I think I think for bands, it's just an important point to kind of like, yeah, change and this is organic and it's not meant to be stuck in one place at one time. And I think that's why every record you guys put out is good, and every record you guys put out is relevant. It's not just like this harkening back thing. And as great as Flag was, and as much as I'm glad I got to see it, it's not a Flag thing where it's just bringing people back to this amazing period in their lives where, yeah, it's been cool to watch the lyrics develop over time and to watch sort of the songs just change and your band kind of continue as like a organic relevant band.
It's we're lucky that really what seemed like the right thing to do at the time was just to work with what you have in front of you, you know. And that part has been good. You're going to write a goofy song about food here and there or whatever, but if you're in our band, but coffee or something. But like, as far as the, the kind of deeper, more meaningful, parts of it will be from real life experience, what's going on right now, and just anything that you see around you that bothers you or makes you happy or whatever, and that those are the things that feed your songwriting. And that's that's really that's lucky because it gives it that longevity. You can still, you can track it through, you can track your life through it. It's like, I guess in a way, like writing, like writing books or writing words. It's just a different way to do it.
I want to keep you forever, but I don't want to make you stay here any longer. Will you come back for part two at some point?
Absolutely. Anytime you want, we can do it. I'm glad we were able to fit it in because we're going to head off and do a little a little run in Europe. And I know we were trying to make it work last week, and and then there's punk rock bowling, and I'm trying to learn how to play fucking shit that I wrote when I was 23 and really nimble. And I'm like, oh my God, trying to get through all of that, So, but it's been really fun to talk to you, by all means, let's dive back in. There's plenty more to get into.